In the 22 years since the Houston Texans became an NFL franchise, they have only made the playoffs 6 times. Despite selecting talented players in the first round of previous drafts such as J.J. Watt, DeAndre Hopkins, and Deshaun Watson, none of these players have remained on the Texans roster. However, in today's video, we will be adding one NFL player from specific NFL draft classes until the Texans win their first ever Super Bowl. If we fail to win the Super Bowl in 5 seasons, I will be giving away an NFL jersey of one of the players we add to the Texans to someone in the comment section. The Carolina Panthers made the decision to select Bryce Young as their top pick in the draft, leaving the Texans with a challenging decision at number 2. The Texans decided to take a chance and draft CJ Stroud, a talented quarterback from Ohio State. The Texans used their 13th overall pick in the draft to select Devin Witherspoon. They continued to bolster their defense by selecting Nolan Smith and Kelly Ringo in the 2nd and 3rd rounds of the draft respectively. Our first season with CJ Stroud at quarterback ended in disappointment, finishing at the bottom of the AFC South with a 5-12 record and missing out on the playoffs for the 4th straight season. CJ Stroud finished the season with 4,500 passing yards and 25 touchdowns, but he did throw 17 picks in his rookie season. However, the 13th overall pick, Devin Witherspoon, had 2 interceptions on the year, while Nolan Smith led the team with 7 sacks. The Dallas Cowboys are your 2023 Super Bowl champion, and somehow Justin Fields wins NFL MVP. During the 2024 NFL Draft, the Texans selected edge rusher Adelaide out of Oregon and wide receiver Marvin Harrison Jr. to help CJ Stroud. At the end of each season, we'll be randomly selecting an NFL draft class using a wheel and picking one superstar player from that particular draft. The first wheel spin lands on the 2021 draft class, and there was plenty of talented players like Micah Parsons, Patrick Surtain, Kyle Pitts, and they were all selected in the first round. We have decided to bring in Jamar Chase to the Houston Texans, and he should drastically improve our offense this year. Since Jamar Chase was drafted in the first round, we can no longer pick a player from the first round throughout the rest of the video. Here's a look at our roster going into season number 2. We have CJ Stroud up to an 82 overall with superstar potential, 98 overall Jamar Chase at wide receiver number 1 with 95 speed and 98 deep route running. Marvin Harrison Jr. and John Mechie will round out the receivers, while Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary will be in the backfield. The defense is much improved, with Kelly Ringo somehow went up to an 84 superstar X Factor. In the opening game against the New York Jets, CJ Stroud was able to find Devin Singletary underneath for a huge gain. The Texans finished off the drive with a 5-yard touchdown run from Dameon Pierce to give them the late lead, and they were able to get a much-needed defensive stop and start the season 1-0. And the Texans did not stop there. After the first 7 games of the season, they led the AFC North with a 5-2 record. Stroud is starting off strong, 13th in passing yards and 8th in passing touchdowns. And after simming the rest of the season, the Texans are 12-5, leading the AFC South. Stroud had a breakout sophomore season, throwing for 5,000 yards and 35 touchdowns, while Dameon Pierce ran for almost 1,000 yards but had a league-leading 24 touchdowns. Newly acquired Jamar Chase really helped CJ Stroud, catching 109 passes for 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns. In the wildcard game against the Raiders, CJ Stroud had a chance to get his team into the end zone but takes a huge sack. On 3rd down and goal from the 16, Stroud scrambles and finds Jamar Chase in the end zone for 6. With the game tied at 24 late in the 4th quarter, Dameon Pierce punches in for 6 from 3 yards out, and the Texans go on to win their first playoff game since 2019. They take on the Colts in the divisional round, but they ended up losing 31-20, eliminating them from the playoffs. CJ Stroud, Jamar Chase, Shaq Mason, and Jalen Petrie were selected to the AFC Pro Bowl team this year. Somehow, the Cardinals end up beating the Bills in their first ever Super Bowl, and Patrick Mahomes wins NFL MVP. The Texans scouting team finds an absolute steal in the 4th round, selecting tight end Lance Butler, who is a hidden dev trait and is already in 76 overall. To make this a little bit more difficult, we'll be alternating between one offensive superstar and one defensive superstar from the wheel spin. Spinning the wheel of NFL draft classes, and it lands on the 2013 draft. This draft was offensive line heavy, with 3 out of the top 4 picks being tackles. The Texans selected DeAndre Hopkins at number 27 this year, but I decided to take Tyrann Mathieu, who was drafted in the 3rd round by Arizona. The offense remains the same, with CJ Stroud leading the offense, and I expect a solid showing from this offense this season. On defense, Mathieu will lead the young players on the team. Kelly Ringo took another step forward, and he's up to an 87 overall. The offense is on a mission this season. Up 17 to start the opening game of the season, the Rams end up fighting back and tying the game in the 4th quarter. Can CJ Stroud show some of his clutch gene? He is able to hand it off to Dameon Pierce, who picks up a first down to close out the game, kicking a 3 to win. Since CJ Stroud has such an impressive 3-game stretch, he has now the superstar X Factor. And after simming the rest of the season, CJ Stroud and the Texans are 11-6. They now have a matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers in the wildcard game. Another solid season for CJ Stroud, throwing for 4,800 yards and 37 touchdowns, while Jamar Chase and Marvin Harrison Jr. had over 1,000 yards each. First round draft pick Ashton Morley has 7.5 sacks in his rookie season, but unfortunately the Steelers were too much to handle and the Texans lost 49-28. The Chiefs defeated the Cowboys in the Super Bowl and Patrick Mahomes won Super Bowl MVP. After adding Jamar Chase and Tyrann Mathieu, the wheel lands on the 2016 draft class. Since we used the first and a third round pick so far, I decided to go with a 5th round pick in Tyreek Hill, who has turned out to be one of the biggest deals in the NFL draft so far. There was a lot of talent in this draft, including Jalen Ramsey, Ezekiel Elliott, Kenny Clark, and Michael Thomas later in the draft. Heading into season number 4, we just have 2 more seasons left to try to lift the Lombardi Trophy, or else I'll be giving a jersey away to someone in the comments. The offense is absolutely stacked. CJ Stroud, Dameon Pierce, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, and a solid O-line. Some of our young players took a step in the right direction on defense, with Ringo up to an 89, Nolan Smith at an 87, and a really good defensive line. The CJ Stroud and Tyreek Hill connection started early with 2 touchdowns in the opening game of the season, where the Texans went on to dominate Miami. After that big win in the season opener, the Texans only won 3 more games through their first 7. But on a more positive note, CJ Stroud is 1st in passing yards and 3rd in passing touchdowns. But luckily for Houston fans, they ended up finishing with a 10-7 record, but they take on a very good New York Jets team in the wildcard game. CJ Stroud finished with a league-leading 5,200 passing yards and 38 touchdowns, while Jamar Chase had 1,500 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill also had himself a great season with 1,300 receiving yards, but the defense lacked sacks this year, finishing the season with 24th in the NFL. The Stroud to Hill connection continues in the playoffs as Tyreek gets the Texans on the board. The Texans elected to go for it on 4th and goal with the game all tied up, and Pierce was able to push his way into the end zone for 7. And up 7, Pierce was able to score again to put this game out of reach, moving them on to the divisional round. The Texans were able to barely sneak out a victory over the Chargers by 1 point, but now take on Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. But Patrick Mahomes was too much for Houston, dominating this game, and they ended up beating the Texans 41-17. The Cowboys went on to win the Super Bowl, where Dak Prescott won Super Bowl MVP and Justin Herbert won NFL MVP. After another disappointing season, the wheel lands on the 2019 draft. This draft class produced some elite talent, with Nick Bosa going at number 2, Josh Jacobs late in the 1st round, but since we can't select anyone in the 1st, 3rd, or 5th round, I decided to take Max Crosby, who was selected 4th by the Oakland Raiders at the time. The offense remains the same, with CJ Stroud up to a 91 overall, but Tyreek Hill went down to a 93. The defense got a whole lot better, with Crosby alongside Nolan Smith, Ringo, Stingley, and Witherspoon at corner, and a solid defensive line. The team is up to an 89 overall with a 91 offense and an 87 defense. We need to win the Super Bowl title this year, or else I will be giving away a jersey of one of the players we added to the Texans so far. The opening game of the season was a matchup against the number 1 overall pick and the number 2 overall pick in the 2023 draft. Stroud led his team to a 35-0 start early in the second half, and the Texans went on to easily defeat the Panthers 42-21. They went on to finish the season with a 15-2 record, which was good enough for a 1st round bye in the playoffs. Stroud finished the season with 5,000 yards and 47 touchdowns, while Pierce had a solid season going for 1,200 yards and 20 touchdowns. Jamar Chase absolutely crushed it with 1,600 receiving yards and 13 touchdowns. Newly acquired Max Crosby finished the year with 8.5 sacks. The Texans were able to defeat a very good Titans team thanks to a great game by Dameon Pierce and CJ Stroud. But now they have a rematch against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. It was a really good back and forth game, but Pierce was able to give them the late lead and Stroud was able to get their 2-point conversion. Mahomes throws a costly interception to Derek Stingley Jr., and that pretty much sealed the deal. The Texans are going to their very first Super Bowl in franchise history. The Super Bowl matchup is a battle of Texas, with the Dallas Cowboys going up against the Houston Texans. Stroud started off strong, but they got stopped in the red zone, so they had to settle for 3. And after a big defensive stop on 3rd and short, Dameon Pierce finds the end zone for 6, putting the Texans up 2 scores. Max Crosby has his superstar X Factor all lit up, and he is able to get a sack on Dak Prescott. Somehow the Cowboys forced a safety, getting them 2 points on the board. The score heading into the second half was 17-5 for the Texans, and the dominance continued in the second half, where Kelly Ringo seals the game with an interception with 3 minutes left. And after adding 4 NFL superstars from 4 different draft classes, the Houston Texans win their first ever Super Bowl. And if you enjoyed a video just like this one, I decided to add one NFL legend to the Seattle Seahawks until they won a Super Bowl.